In a quiet restaurant, a little girl, soaked and trembling, walked in. No one paid her any attention, until she stepped closer and stood in front of a lonely man. She held up a crumpled drawing and whispered, "Can you walk me to school? Please, I don't feel safe." He froze, until he saw what was drawn. His reply wasn't loud, but it changed her life forever. The clink of silver against porcelain echoed through the dimly lit dining room like water dripping in a cavern. Grant Whitfield sat alone at his usual corner booth in the Mariner's Table, a waterfront restaurant overlooking the Ashley River in downtown Charleston. The waiter had brought out the chef's tasting menu: seared scallops, dry-aged ribeye, a truffled cauliflower puree. But Grant hadn't touched a thing. He just stared past the flickering candlelight, past the curved wine glass he never lifted, out the towering windows where the river glittered beneath the moonlight. From the outside, he was every inch the Millionaire CEO, navy Tom Ford suit, tailored to precision, crisp white shirt, cufflinks that quietly whispered legacy. But inside, he was a man hollowed out by silence. He couldn't remember the last meal he'd tasted, or the last time a sound moved him. Every conversation he heard anymore, about markets, mergers, the harbor contracts, sounded like noise through glass. A violin hummed softly from the live trio near the bar. Couples laughed, forks clinked, wine flowed, but none of it penetrated Grant's world. His world was curated isolation. The more money he made, the smaller his orbit became, until the little girl walked in. She didn't belong. That much was obvious the moment the restaurant seemed to hold its breath. She couldn't have been older than 7. Her Navy school blazer hung unevenly off one shoulder, sleeves too long, a badge half torn. Her dark curls were damp, clinging to her temples. She walked with a purposeful stillness, her feet barely making a sound against the marble, as if she'd trained herself not to draw attention, and yet every head turned. A murmur swept the room as the maitre d' spotted her. He began to intercept, but before he could reach her, Grant raised 2 fingers without looking up. That simple gesture froze the man in place like a general's silent order. The little girl kept walking, past tables of women in silk and men in suits, until she reached Grant's table. She stopped exactly 3 feet from him, clutching a sheet of paper so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Grant finally looked at her. Her eyes, big, brown, filled with something raw, met his. Fear, yes, but more than that. Calculation, determination, and something he hadn't seen in a long, long time. Hope tethered to desperation. She took a shaky breath. "Can you walk me to school? Please?" Her voice was small, the syllables pushed through fear like pebbles dragged across ice. "I don't feel safe." Grant didn't move. For a second, he wasn't sure he'd heard her right. Then he glanced down at her hands and saw the paper she was holding. It was a child's drawing, done in fading crayon. A small stick figure with curly hair stood surrounded by taller ones with scribbled angry faces and red slashes for mouths. Off to the side, a black rectangle with 4 circles, clearly a car. There was even an arrow pointing at it labeled "He Watches." The figure of the girl was crying. His fingers moved before his mind could stop them. He reached slowly for the drawing. As he did, he saw it. A ring of bruises around her wrist. Small, finger-sized, already yellowing at the edges. He didn't speak yet. His throat had gone dry. Instead, he looked back at her face. So small, so still, and something inside him shifted. Not all at once. Just a flicker. But it was enough to bring him back to a place he hadn't visited in decades. a place where terror lived behind closed doors, where silence was safer than speaking, where help never came unless you asked the wrong kind of person. His hand, now holding the drawing, shook slightly. She noticed. They said I was making it up, she continued, voice faster now, as if afraid she'd run out of time. The teacher said I was being dramatic. The principal said kids need to be tough. But he waits for me every day after school in a black car. And they say things, mean things. And they push me. No one stops them. Not ever. Grant's mouth opened, but no words came. He simply looked at the drawing again, then back to her face. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, he didn't see a boardroom. He didn't see a deal or a return on investment. He saw himself, small, terrified, and ignored. His chest ached in a place he thought had turned to stone years ago. Finally, he said, "Why me?" It wasn't a challenge. It wasn't cold. It was flat, like he was trying to understand a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. The girl's chin quivered, and her voice trembled, but her answer was heartbreakingly clear. "Because people are scared of you," she said. "So maybe they'll be scared to hurt me too." That was when the glass in his hand creaked. He looked down to realize his grip had gone white-knuckled, and the stem had nearly snapped between his fingers. He loosened his hold, then set the drawing gently on the table in front of him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Grant did something no one in the restaurant expected, not even himself. He stood. No words, just the slow slide of his chair against the polished wood floor. He looked down at her, that small thing in a too-big blazer, standing like she was one whisper away from shattering. Then he said the words that would begin to undo everything he'd carefully built around his heart. "What's your name?" Her voice barely made it out. "Maya." He nodded, and for the first time in years, something real passed through his eyes. "Sit," he said quietly, pulling out the chair beside him. She hesitated, then obeyed. Outside, the river continued its slow, silent current. But inside that booth, something else had begun to move. Maya sat stiffly at the edge of the leather seat, legs dangling above the floor, hands still gripping the edge of her crumpled blazer as if it were a parachute she might need to deploy. The untouched cup of hot cocoa sat in front of her, wisps of steam curling upward, fading into the soft lighting of the booth. Her eyes kept darting toward it, then back to Grant's face, waiting for a cue. For permission, Grant noticed. And something about that tiny, hesitant flicker of obedience, learned through fear, not trust, lodged itself beneath his ribs like a splinter. He gave a single nod, subtle, almost imperceptible. Only then did she raise the cup to her lips with both hands and take the smallest sip, like a child who'd once been punished for wanting too much. Across from her, Grant leaned back in his seat, fingers steepled beneath his chin. Cole stood just outside the booth, his stance deceptively casual, though his eyes never stopped scanning the room. He'd seen enough tonight to know this was no random interruption. Something was off, dangerous, and worse, personal. She walked straight through the front entrance, Cole said in a low voice. No hesitation, no adult trailing her, no car outside. Grant nodded once. The drawing. Yeah, Cole muttered. He reached into his inside jacket pocket, pulling out a phone. With a few swipes, he opened a gallery of images, grainy surveillance shots, mostly night shots with timestamps. I've seen a car like that one, black Dodge Durango, tinted windows, Been making laps on the east side, specifically near public schools. We flagged it last week. Grant didn't respond. His attention was still fixed on Maya, who sat with both palms now flat on the edge of the table, Coco forgotten. "Tell me again," he said gently, voice low but firm, "about the man in the car." She swallowed, shoulders tensing, then released a breath as if reciting something she'd practiced a dozen times in her head. "He started waiting across the street. At first I thought maybe someone's dad, but he never got out. Just sat there, engine running. Every day. Then..." Her voice dropped, barely audible now. "Last Friday when I walked by, he rolled down the window. He said he knew which apartment was mine, that I had a pink curtain with a rip in the corner. He said..." Her eyes flashed to Grant's face, then away again. "He said next time he might come say hi." Grant's fingers twitched slightly on the table. He didn't speak. Maya kept going, voice rising in speed, as if spilling it all would lessen the weight. "I told my teacher. She said I had a vivid imagination. I told the principal. He said kids need to solve their own problems. I told my mom. She called the police. But they said unless he gets out of the car, it's not a crime. Mean words aren't a crime." There was a beat of silence. Then Maya added, quieter, "But bruises are." She pulled her sleeve back. The bruises hadn't faded. They wrapped around her wrist like a fingerprint left in silence. Small, distinct, shaped like fingers that gripped too tightly. Grant inhaled through his nose, slow and deliberate, and pressed his fingers into the edge of the table until the wood dented beneath his grip. He felt the edge of an old rage, one he thought he'd buried. A memory stirred. A dark hallway, a slammed door, the sound of breaking glass. No one had come for him either, and eventually, he'd stopped expecting rescue. He stood suddenly. Maya flinched, shoulders jerking instinctively. Grant froze. "I'm not..." he began, but the words caught. He lowered himself back into his seat, voice quieter now. "I'm not mad at you, Maya." She nodded, but she didn't quite believe him. "Not yet." Cole leaned down, murmuring, "Grant, we don't know who this guy is. Could be West Shore. Could be something else. But they've been trying to push past the railroad corridor. Schools, community centers, low-income pockets. Classic intimidation play." Grant didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed locked on Maya. Inside his chest, something churned, a warning voice, sharp and defensive. "Don't do this. Don't open that door. You built a life with locks for a reason." But then Maya looked at him again, her eyes searching, still full of a hope so fragile it looked ready to collapse. She whispered, "You said you wouldn't let anyone hurt me." He hadn't. Not exactly. But the words hung there anyway, floating in the space between promise and action. He looked at her drawing again, saw the little girl alone among giants, the black car, the crying stick figure. And suddenly, he wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking at himself. His voice, when it came, was low, unshaken. "What's your address, Maya?" Maya hesitated for a moment, then pulled a crumpled slip of paper from her pocket and slowly wrote down the address. Her handwriting was shaky, but the numbers were clear. Grant read it in silence, folded the note carefully, and tucked it into his jacket. He didn't ask her to explain. He didn't need to. Cole raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. They'd been through worse. Still, this was new, personal. When Maya finished the last sip of her cocoa, she set the cup down carefully. Then, without another word, slipped out of the booth and darted toward the door. By the time Grant stood, she was already gone, like a ghost the world had nearly forgotten to protect. Grant leaned toward Cole. "Tonight," he said. "We go see it." Cole gave the slightest nod. "You want backup?" "No," Grant said. "Not yet. But I want everything on that car, and find out who runs the territory around that school." He paused. "And Cole?" "Yeah? Let's find out what the hell this principal's been doing while a 7-year-old begged for help." The air around the booth shifted. Conversations resumed in cautious murmurs. Silver clinked. Again. The world moved on, oblivious. But Grant Whitfield didn't. He sat in the booth, the drawing in front of him, the cocoa slowly cooling, and the ghost of a promise forming behind his eyes. He'd shut the door to his past long ago. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to open one for someone else. The elevator in the old apartment building jerked twice before shuddering to a stop on the 3rd floor. Grant stepped out into a hallway that smelled like damp carpet and boiled cabbage. The fluorescent lights above flickering like they couldn't decide whether to live or die. The contrast between this place and his world, his oceanside estate with heated floors and silent hallways, was jarring. In his tailored navy coat, polished Oxfords, and faint trace of cologne, Grant Whitfield looked like a foreign object dropped into a place that had long stopped expecting miracles. Cole followed a few steps behind, phone in hand, running a silent search on nearby known gang affiliations. The building had come up in several incident reports, most flagged under non-prioritized investigation. In other words, it was the kind of place the city forgot on purpose. They reached apartment 3B. The door was chipped at the bottom, the paint peeling, the peephole covered by duct tape. Before Grant could knock, it opened. Emily Bennett stood in the doorway in navy scrubs that bore faint bleach stains near the hem. Her face was pale from fatigue, but her posture was straight. She looked like someone who didn't have time to be scared, but was scared anyway. She didn't greet them, just stared. Her eyes flicked from Grant to Cole, then back to Grant. "You're him," she said finally. "The man from the restaurant." Grant gave a quiet nod. "May we come in?" Emily hesitated. Then she stepped aside. The apartment was small. 2 rooms, maybe 3. The heat clanked through the baseboards but couldn't quite reach the corners, where the walls had darkened with moisture. A pink backpack hung from a coat hook, one strap ripped and knotted. The couch sagged in the middle. A baby monitor sat on the counter, silent, though there was no baby in sight. Maya wasn't there. Emily gestured toward the bedroom. "She's lying down. Said she had a headache. I think..." She hesitated. "I think today took a lot out of her." Grant gave a short nod, eyes scanning the room. There were details here he couldn't unsee. A padlocked bedroom window, cracked tile near the radiator, unpaid bills tucked under a magnet on the fridge shaped like a sunflower. "You shouldn't have come," Emily said softly. "Whatever my daughter told you, thank you for listening. But we don't have money. I can't pay for bodyguards. Or favors." The words stopped him. Grant turned toward her, his expression unreadable. Then, something unexpected. His voice, when it came, was low, but with an edge of disbelief. "You think this is about money?" Her eyes didn't waver. "Everything's about money." Grant didn't answer at first. His gaze fell to the counter where a jar of peanut butter and a loaf of white bread sat. Next to it, a small plastic container of cocoa mix. Off-brand, half empty. He looked away, jaw tight. "No," he said finally. "Your daughter asked me for protection. That doesn't cost anything." Emily's breath caught. Her lips parted slightly as if to apologize again, but no words came. Instead, she wrapped her arms around herself and nodded once. Grant walked toward the small dining table and pulled out a chair. "Sit," he said gently. "Tell me everything." She hesitated, then sat, and for the next 15 minutes, she poured it out. The bullying that had escalated from name-calling to pushing to bruises, the teachers who shrugged, the principal who dismissed every complaint, the man in the black SUV who started showing up near the school gate and then by their building. The night Maya came home sobbing, whispering, "He knows where we live." The 3 police reports that went nowhere. The phone call from the vice principal that ended with the words, "Maybe she just needs more friends." "She doesn't sleep through the night anymore," Emily said quietly, eyes fixed on a stain on the table. "She wakes up crying. She keeps the light on and sleeps with her shoes on like she might need to run." Grant didn't speak. He was still, like stone. But something inside him ground painfully to life. A memory, sharper than it should have been, rose from the dark. Himself at age 10, pressing his ear to the floorboards, trying to hear if his father had passed out yet, or if the storm was still coming. Maya's world was fear in miniature, and everyone meant to protect her had failed. He glanced over at Cole, who stood silently near the front door, face unreadable. Then Grant looked at Emily again. "I want to see her drawings," he said. Emily blinked. "You already saw one." "All of them." Emily stood slowly and walked to a small cabinet near the couch. She opened the drawer and pulled out a thin folder, the paper edges bent from use. She handed it to him wordlessly. Grant opened it. Page after page of crayon drawings spilled into his lap. Stick figures. A girl surrounded by angry red scribbles. Cars with black windows. Faces with no mouths. One drawing showed a figure labeled "me," sitting alone on a bench while others laughed in groups. But it was the last drawing that stopped him. 3 figures, a girl, a woman, and a tall man with a scar at his temple, holding the girl's hand. The girl had drawn him, not as a hero, not with a cape, just standing there, beside her. Grant traced the line of the drawing with his thumb. For a second the room blurred slightly. Before he could process what the drawing truly meant, reality knocked, fast and unwelcome. Cole's phone buzzed. He stepped outside to take the call. When he returned a moment later, his expression had changed. "Boss," he said quietly. "Black SUV, 2 blocks over, still idling." Emily froze. Her hand flew to her mouth. Grant stood. The shadows of his past, long buried under silence and money, were rising again. But not for him this time. For a child who had asked the wrong man for help, and, somehow, found the right one. He moved to the window. Outside, across the street and down the block, he spotted the glint of chrome beneath a flickering street lamp. The engine was on. The figure inside was nothing but a silhouette behind tinted glass. He didn't flinch. Instead, he turned to Emily. "Do you have a photo of the car?" She nodded, rushing to her phone. She scrolled, then showed him a blurry image, just enough to match the license plate with what Cole already had on file. Grant looked at Cole. "Start the file. I want to know who owns it, who drives it, and who let it sit there for 3 weeks without interference." Cole nodded. Then Grant turned back to the window. He didn't say it aloud, but inside, he knew. This wasn't about business anymore. This was war. And the girl sleeping in the back room? She wasn't alone anymore. The early light over Charleston was soft and pale, filtering through the lacework of oak branches and Spanish moss like a secret the morning whispered only to those willing to listen. The sky was painted in quiet pastels, and the streets were still slick from the night's drizzle. On Sullivan's Island, Grant Whitfield stood in the marble foyer of his mansion, adjusting the cuffs of his navy overcoat as the grandfather clock in the hallway struck 7:30. He looked different, not in appearance. His hair was combed the same way, his suit immaculate, his shoes polished to a mirror finish. But there was something in the way he moved, a shift in weight, a tension in the jaw, that suggested something had altered in him, subtly but permanently. Cole stood beside the Bentley parked in the circular drive, hands folded, reading Grant's face the way a soldier watches a general before battle. "Still want to go alone?" he asked. Grant gave a short nod. "This isn't a show." He chose a different vehicle this morning, a dark blue sedan, not the usual bulletproof SUV, less conspicuous, more human. 15 minutes later, he pulled up to the curb in front of the beige brick building where Maya lived. The street was quiet, the wind carrying the scent of coffee and river water. A faint rustle came from the third-floor window, curtains shifting, and then the front door opened. Maya stepped out slowly, already dressed in her school uniform. Her backpack looked heavier than her entire frame. Her coat was a size too big, and the soles of her shoes were peeling slightly at the edges. But her hair had been neatly combed into two tight braids, and her chin was lifted just a little higher than yesterday. She approached the car with caution, as if half expecting it to vanish. When Grant got out and opened the passenger door for her, her eyes widened. "You came," she whispered. "I said I would," he answered simply. She climbed in without another word. The drive to Riverview Elementary took 12 minutes. Neither of them spoke for the first half. Grant focused on the road, glancing at her only through the rear-view mirror. Maya sat stiff-backed, her small hands clutching the backpack straps in her lap. She didn't hum. She didn't kick her legs. She just watched. Halfway there, Grant noticed the frayed shoelace dangling from her left sneaker. At a red light, he put the car in park, reached into the back seat and said, "Foot." Maya hesitated. Then she lifted her leg slightly. He crouched, took the lace in his hands, and tied a perfect knot. Double loop, snug but not too tight. Then he looked up at her and said, "There, you're good." The moment was so ordinary, so understated, that neither of them knew what to do with it. But Maya smiled, just a little. It was the kind of smile that sneaks in before the sadness remembers to block it. When they arrived at the school, Grant didn't pull into the drop-off lane with the other parents in minivans and crossovers. He drove to the front steps, past the buses, where everyone could see. Parents glanced up, phones tilted discreetly. Teachers paused mid-conversation. He got out of the car and walked around to open Maya's door, and the world shifted. The girl who'd eaten alone in the library, who'd been told she was overreacting, who'd been followed home and told to toughen up, now walked through the front gates of Riverview Elementary, holding the hand of a man whose mere presence made others step aside. Travis Clayton, the boy who had thrown her lunch into the toilet, stood near the bike racks with two other boys. He was mid-sentence when he saw them. His words stopped. His mouth hung open slightly. One of the boys beside him dropped a basketball. Grant didn't look at them. He didn't have to. His silence did more than 100 threats could have. They reached the front steps, where Principal Dalton stood in a khaki windbreaker, coffee in one hand, clipboard in the other. The color drained from his face when he saw Grant. Mr. Whitfield, this is unexpected," Dalton stammered, stepping forward. Grant reached inside his coat pocket and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He handed it to the principal without breaking stride. "In that folder," he said, "you'll find 3 official complaints filed by this student's mother. Photos, hospital documents, copies of emails your staff failed to respond to. Also included is a certified donation check for $50,000, earmarked for your school's security and anti-bullying programs." Dalton took the envelope, flustered. Thank you, but There's also a list of civil attorneys specializing in negligence lawsuits," Grant added, his voice lowering just enough to make the words burn. "Should this school fail again, the next conversation won't be as polite." Dalton blinked, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled out of water. Then Grant knelt. In the dead center of the morning traffic flow, in front of teachers, parents, students, and security cameras, he knelt before Maya, buttoned the top of her coat, straightened her collar, and fixed the strap of her backpack. She looked at him like he'd just done something impossible. "You're good now," he said, standing. She nodded, and for the first time in weeks, walked into the school without looking back. As Grant turned toward the car, one of the mothers standing nearby whispered to another, "Was that Grant Whitfield?" The other replied, "I think so, and I think someone's about to have a very bad week." As he reached the car door, he heard a small voice behind him. "Mr. Grant?" He turned. Maya stood just inside the glass doors, one hand pressed to the frame. "Do I have to be afraid tomorrow?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the buzz of the school bell. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he crossed to her in 2 strides, knelt again, and gently placed his hand over hers on the glass. "No," he said. "Not anymore." And with that, he turned and walked back to the car as the morning sun crept higher over the school, casting long shadows that no longer reached her. The nights on Sullivan's Island had grown cooler. Ocean winds slipped in through the tall windows of Grant's mansion, brushing over the marble floors and into rooms that once sat still and lifeless. But now, something subtle had changed. A single lamp remained on in the grand entry each evening, a soft pool of light near the base of the staircase, casting a warm glow onto the polished wood. It wasn't for function. It was a signal. To no one. Or maybe to someone who'd made him feel less like a shadow in his own life. Grant didn't speak of it, just as he didn't mention how he now woke earlier, or how, without ever marking the time, he arrived near Riverview Elementary every morning and parked a block away. Always facing the front gates, always early enough to see Maya arrive. He never approached her again. That wasn't the point. It was enough to watch her walk in, ponytail swinging, shoes newly tied, posture just a little taller. Sometimes she skipped. Sometimes she lingered outside the door, saying goodbye to her mother with an extra hug. Grant kept his windows rolled up and said nothing. He was no longer the man waiting for anything. He was simply there. And presence, it turned out, could be louder than words. His mansion, once a silent temple of solitude, now bore other signs of quiet transformation. A casserole dish sat near the sink, scrubbed and drying on a linen towel. The night before, it had arrived with Emily Bennett. She had knocked, hesitantly, her hair pulled back in a messy knot, still in hospital scrubs. Her voice trembled when she spoke. "I just wanted to say thank you. And this was my mom's recipe." Grant had blinked, then stepped aside. They sat in the kitchen, his kitchen, where everything gleamed with stainless steel and soft under-cabinet lighting. And there, on a tall white stool beside a man whose dinners usually came plated by chefs, Emily served meat and rice from a Tupperware container she'd carried in a cloth grocery bag. Grant ate in silence, and somewhere between bites, between the clatter of fork against ceramic and the occasional sound of distant waves against the coast, he realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten without a screen, without a spreadsheet, without a server waiting silently nearby. When they finished, Emily had gathered the dishes quickly, murmuring something about not wanting to take up his time. But before she left, she turned at the door and said, "She sleeps through the night now. That's new." Grant had only nodded, his expression unreadable, but the words stayed with him long after the door closed. That same night, Maya gave him another drawing. She'd slipped it into his hand outside school the morning before. No words, just a folded paper, the kind already worn from being held too tightly. He hadn't opened it then, but now, in the quiet of his office, beneath the amber glow of a banker's lamp, he unfolded it with the same care someone might give to a legal contract. 3 stick figures stood in a line, one labeled me, one mom, and in the center, taller, suited, with a small scar drawn at the eyebrow, Mr. Grant. He stared at it for a long time. He wasn't holding her hand. She was holding his. Something inside him cracked, not violently, but with the soft crumble of stone that had stood too long under pressure. He reached out, slowly, and traced his finger over the figure representing himself. There were no capes, no shining medals, just someone present. He wasn't saving her. She was saving him. He folded the drawing, placed it gently into the drawer beside his bed, right next to his watch and a key to a room he no longer used. Later that week, as the leaves along the Charleston trees began to bronze with early autumn, Cole stepped into Grant's study without knocking. "The SUV came back," he said simply. "Twice. Once yesterday. Once this morning. Still idling by the northeast corner of the school property. No license plate visible. Same model, same tints. Engine running both times." Grant stood from his chair. "Emily saw it?" he asked. "She didn't mention it," Cole replied. "But one of the other parents did. Said they thought it was strange. Creepy." Grant's jaw tightened. His voice came like steel dragged over gravel. "You want me to handle it?" Cole asked, eyes narrowing. "No," Grant said. He turned toward the window, looking out over the endless stretch of marsh beyond his property, where the water met the sky in that quiet, hazy blue. His reflection stared back at him in the glass, but it wasn't the man who built empires. It wasn't the man who tore contracts apart in boardrooms with a single look. It was a man who had finally been given someone to protect, and he wasn't going to let fear take her back. "I'll handle it. Not with fists, not with fury, but with the kind of power only someone like him could wield. Paper trails, names, systems that couldn't ignore him the way they ignored everyone else." Cole didn't argue. There were certain things in Grant Whitfield's life he never let anyone else do. And this was one of them. That night, as the city slipped into darkness, Grant stood at his window, watching the stars blur into view above the harbor. Behind him, the lamp in the foyer still glowed, and for the first time in a very long time, the light inside the house no longer felt like it was just for show. Monday morning arrived with a brittle kind of quiet, the kind that settles right before something breaks. The sky over Charleston was overcast, smudged with gray as if the world itself was holding its breath. Grant stood in front of his office's floor-to-ceiling windows, arms crossed, gaze locked on the harbor that once gave him peace. Now, It barely registered. His mind was elsewhere, on a black SUV that wouldn't go away, on a girl with tiny shoes, and on a feeling he hadn't known in decades. Fear. Not for himself, for her. Cole hadn't checked in yet, which was unusual. He was always early, always reliable, but now it had been 10 minutes since his scheduled surveillance update. Grant had called twice. No answer. He paced the length of the office, phone still in his hand. The walls felt closer, his thoughts louder. Something dark churned in his gut, familiar and dangerous. He gripped the phone tighter. What if they got bold? What if Maya... Just as his pulse climbed toward a rage-laced panic, the office door opened. Cole walked in, windblown and unapologetic. "Sorry, we had to tail someone," he said. "Didn't want to risk blowing the route." Grant exhaled so slowly it almost sounded like a growl of relief. "You could have texted." "Didn't want anything traceable," Cole replied. Then he placed a sealed manila envelope on the desk. "This is everything," he said. "Photos, audio, affidavits, surveillance timestamps, medical records from urgent care visits. 4 other families from the neighborhood came forward after a little persuasion. Their kids were followed too. Threats, scare tactics. Same car, same crew." Grant didn't open the folder yet. He simply stared at it, letting the weight of its contents settle into the room. "You're sure it's them?" he asked. Cole nodded. "West Shore. Low-level extortion ring. They've been targeting single mothers in the East Side districts. They push just hard enough to terrify, but not enough to leave evidence. Most never report. And the ones who do?" He gestured toward the folder. "Get told they're imagining things." Grant finally sat down and opened the folder. The first photo was of the black Dodge SUV parked just beyond the school's property line. Time-stamped, geotagged. The second showed it idling across from Maya's apartment complex. The third, grainier but damning, caught a man leaning halfway out the passenger window, staring toward a child with a pink backpack. Grant's jaw locked. "Who's getting this?" he asked. "Rachel Monroe," Cole replied. "Assistant district attorney, seasoned, clean, known for going after child endangerment and organized crime. She's one of the good ones." Grant didn't hesitate. "Deliver it. Today. By hand." Cole nodded, took the folder, and left without another word. By Thursday, the headlines hit. Charleston DA announces sweep of local gang involved in targeting families near schools. School board donor linked to suspected cover-up. New evidence forces investigation into negligence claims at Riverview Elementary. Travis Clayton's father, a local car dealership owner and major donor, was arrested on obstruction charges. Members of the West Shore crew were taken into custody. 3 officers from Charleston PD were placed under internal review for failure to act on reports filed by Emily and others. The city had tried to look away, but someone had turned the lights on. That afternoon, Grant waited near the school again, this time on foot, leaning against a street lamp across from the main gate. He didn't bother with the car. He needed to see her reaction with his own eyes. At exactly 2:58, the bell rang. Children poured out in waves, buzzing with laughter and backpacks bouncing against their shoulders. Grant's eyes scanned the crowd. And then, there she was, Maya, in her red sweater, holding her mother's hand. But the moment she saw him, she let go and ran. Grant knelt automatically, not even thinking. She crashed into him like a bird returning home, arms thrown around his neck, her face buried against his shoulder. He froze. For a heartbeat, his hands hovered uselessly in the air. Then slowly, uncertainly, he wrapped them around her. One pat on the back, then another. Then he just held on. Emily approached seconds later, her steps slower, more hesitant. Her eyes were glassy but dry. "I saw the news," she said softly. Grant nodded, still crouched beside Maya. "They're not coming back, are they?" Maya whispered into his ear. "No," he replied, voice low but steady. "They're not." She leaned back slightly, just enough to look him in the eye. Her face glowed with a kind of wonder only children possess, the belief that monsters could vanish when someone strong stood in front of them. "I'm not afraid anymore," she said. And something inside Grant finally exhaled. He stood with her still holding on to one hand. He gave Emily a look that said more than he could put into words. She nodded. They started walking together, toward the street, toward safety, toward something resembling a future. Across the way, a TV news van rolled slowly past the school. They didn't stop. The story had already aired, but the real ending wasn't in the report. It was here, in the sound of a little girl laughing softly as she skipped next to a man who had once been known for being untouchable, and who now knew exactly what it meant to kneel down and make a promise. For the first time in years, Grant Whitfield felt lighter. Not victorious, just present. And that was enough. The first time Maya noticed the star-shaped nightlight, it was already glowing on her nightstand. Its soft yellow light painted constellations on the peeling walls of her bedroom, throwing tiny orbits onto the ceiling. She stared at it in silence, blinking slowly like she wasn't sure it was real. Then she touched it, just to be sure, and whispered, "It's warm." Emily watched from the doorway, fingers pressed to her lips. She hadn't bought it. She hadn't even mentioned it, but someone had. Someone who paid attention to more than safety. Someone who noticed what her daughter had stared at through the dollar store window on their walk home the week before. Grant had said nothing. He never did. But his fingerprints were all over the quiet changes in their life. The locks on the front door, new, reinforced, coded. The deadbolt no longer stuck. The hallway light outside their unit, once flickering for months, now replaced with a motion sensor flood. A small security camera mounted at the top corner of the stairwell, almost invisible unless you were looking. Even the rent, quietly paid 3 months ahead. Emily hadn't asked. She wasn't sure she would have said yes. But when she approached the property manager to update her mailing address, the woman behind the desk gave her a polite smile and said, "Everything's been handled. Someone from Mr. Whitfield's office called last week." And just like that, a different kind of weight lifted. Maya, once sleepless and afraid to use the bathroom alone, now woke up humming to herself. She left for school with both shoelaces tied, a snack in her pocket, and a growing collection of friendship bracelets made from neon rubber bands wrapped proudly around her wrist. There were still moments, flinches when a stranger passed too close, quick looks over her shoulder, but the shadows that followed her were getting shorter. The school had changed too. The atmosphere at Riverview Elementary was noticeably tighter, more alert. Teachers now stood at every monitored post during pickup and drop-off. Students wore laminated ID cards around their necks. Parents signed in at a locked front desk with a new face, an actual security guard, stationed nearby. Principal Dalton kept a low profile. His emails to parents had become oddly formal, filled with links to new safety policies and photos of community officers visiting classrooms. Rumor had it he'd declined a renomination to the school board committee, citing family obligations. No one believed that, but no one said it aloud either. Mrs. Patterson, The teacher who once told Maya she was too sensitive had been reassigned to administrative review. Her position was quietly filled by a younger woman named Miss Jennings, who, according to Maya, wore fuzzy socks in class and played music during math time. She asked me what my favorite animal was, Maya said one evening, setting her backpack down by the kitchen table. I said owls. She said mine too, but I think she was lying just to make me smile. Emily smiled softly. Maybe she was, but sometimes that's okay. That night, after dinner, Emily hesitated before reaching into the oven and pulling out a second tray. She placed it carefully on a chipped ceramic dish, added a folded napkin and 2 forks, then glanced over at Maya. Go ahead, she said. Put on your shoes. Maya's eyes widened. We're going to him? If we're lucky, Emily said. The walk to Grant's mansion was short. They didn't go through the front gate. Instead, they turned left down a small sand path that led to the back terrace where the kitchen lights still glowed. The wind carried the smell of rosemary and cedar from the garden. The air was cool, salt-laced, the kind of evening that made the world feel quiet in a good way. When they knocked, the door opened within seconds. Grant stood there, not in a suit, but in a dark sweater and soft jeans. No shoes, hair a little tousled. For a man who always looked like he stepped out of a GQ magazine, he somehow looked ordinary. Emily lifted the dish. There's no agenda, she said. Just meatloaf. He stepped aside without a word. They sat at the long wooden island in the kitchen, the same place Emily had brought her casserole that first time. And this time, the meal tasted less like repayment and more like belonging. Maya talked the most. She recited a full story about how her new friend Ava had a dog named Pickle who ate her homework, and how she didn't believe that story for a second, but laughed anyway. Grant listened, eyes soft, mouth twitching into a rare half-smile now and then. After dessert, Maya reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small bundle. I made you something, she said. Grant blinked. You did? She nodded and unwrapped it slowly, revealing a rubber band bracelet, woven from blue and green loops, slightly crooked, but meticulously done. He stared at it like it was made of gold. You don't have to wear it, Maya said, suddenly shy. I just thought maybe you'd like it. He held it in both hands, silent for a moment. Then he placed it on the table next to his Rolex, the very one that once defined him. I think it's perfect, he said. Maya beamed. Later, as Emily helped her daughter put on her coat near the door, Maya turned suddenly and looked at Grant. Are you going to keep watching us forever? She asked. He tilted his head. Would you want me to? She shrugged. I don't know. I just like knowing you're close. He knelt again, habitual now, and adjusted her scarf. I'm not watching, he said, just staying close. She nodded like that answer was good enough. When they left, the porch light stayed on. Back inside, Grant walked into his study, turned off his desk lamp, and stood for a moment in the quiet. Then he picked up the bracelet again, not to pocket it, but to wear it. It didn't match anything he owned, but somehow it matched everything he'd become. 3 days passed before Emily noticed the envelope tucked beneath her water glass at their usual table in the corner of the Mariner's table. The same table where, weeks earlier, a little girl had walked in and shattered the silence of a man who hadn't felt anything in years. The restaurant was busier now. Colder evenings brought couples and business diners wrapped in linen and candlelight. But Emily sat alone, still wearing her scrubs, a little flushed from her shift, eyes rimmed with fatigue and hope. The envelope was cream-colored, heavy stock, No return address, just her name, written in penmanship too precise to be casual. She reached for it slowly, as if pulling it too quickly might erase the moment. Inside was a small black velvet box, and inside that was the star. A silver pendant, delicate and quietly perfect, shaped like the nightlight in Maya's room, the one that had appeared without a word, glowing over her pillow like a silent promise. The metal caught the candlelight and threw it back in scattered shards across the table. It looked impossibly expensive, yet warm in her palm. But it was the note that took her breath. Just 9 words. Now the world believes her. That's all that mattered. No signature, no initials. But she knew. It wasn't jewelry, it was acknowledgement. The kind you don't get from systems, from officials, from people who say, "We're sorry, but that's not enough proof." This was proof that someone with power had decided to spend it protecting a child no one had listened to until it was nearly too late. Her fingers trembled as she fastened the necklace around her neck. It rested just beneath her collarbone like a private oath. By morning, across town, Grant sat in his home office, the lights dimmed, a fire crackling in the corner hearth that he rarely used before now. He stared down at the small object in his hand, the rubber band bracelet Maya had made. Blue and green, slightly uneven, the kind of thing most men in his position would laugh at or quietly discard. He didn't. He took off his Rolex, the one that had once defined every inch of his public image, and placed it gently into the drawer beside him. Then, without ceremony, he slipped the bracelet over his wrist. It caught slightly on the edge of his cuff. He didn't fix it. Outside, the morning sun was beginning to rise, glinting across the water that surrounded Sullivan's Island in lazy arcs of gold. He stepped outside and into his car. Not the Bentley, but the same dark blue sedan he had picked Maya up in that first morning. He drove with the windows down for the first time in years. At Riverview Elementary, the students were already pouring out into the playground. Laughter echoed between the buildings, bouncing off the sidewalks like confetti. Grant slowed as he approached the crosswalk, eyes scanning automatically. Not for threats, but for her. And then he saw her. Maya. Her coat was unzipped, her backpack swinging, and her face bright. She was talking animatedly with 2 girls he hadn't seen before. They didn't walk away. They didn't avoid her. They nodded. They laughed. And then one of them reached for Maya's hand. She glanced toward the street and saw him. Her face broke into a grin so big it made something in his chest twist in the best way. She waved, full arm, like she didn't care who saw. He raised 2 fingers from the steering wheel, the same 2 fingers he'd used that night in the restaurant, the first night she entered his life and stopped him from disappearing in plain sight. She nodded once, satisfied, then turned back to her friends. Grant didn't park. He didn't need to. The message had been sent long ago. And now, she was safe, seen, heard. He turned the car back toward the bridge that led away from the school, the early sunlight filtering through the trees in soft, golden slices. As the city came to life around him, he didn't feel the same cold distance he used to. His hands on the wheel were steady. The bracelet on his wrist shifted slightly every time he turned, a constant, gentle reminder that strength doesn't always look like silence, and that power, when used right, can build instead of break. Back at the restaurant, a waiter passed Emily's table and set down a fresh cup of coffee she hadn't ordered. He nodded toward the window, then disappeared. She smiled, fingers brushing the pendant at her throat. Some debts don't require repayment, only remembrance, and some goodbyes aren't ends, they're transitions, From fear to safety, from silence to voice, from alone to held. As Grant's car crossed the final span of the Sullivan's Island Bridge, he opened the window wider. The breeze caught his hair, the sea air biting against his cheek, but he didn't roll it up. He didn't need the walls anymore. The world had come in, and for the first time in his life, he was glad it had. Walking her to school, he said under his breath, eyes still on the road, voice thick but sure, changed more than her life. And it had, in every possible way. If this story touched your heart, even just a little, we invite you to stay with us. Because here at Restoring Tales, every story reminds us that love, kindness, and second chances still exist. And if you felt moved, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who might need a little hope today. Every click helps us spread more kindness into the world. There are more tales waiting, stories of resilience, hope, and quiet heroes among us. So if you believe in the healing power of love and the beauty of life's small moments, be sure to subscribe to Restoring Tales and turn on notifications. Because the next story might be the one your heart's been waiting for. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.
The morning sun gently illuminated the clear waters of the canals, where gondolas drifted quietly, creating an almost otherworldly sense of peace. Maria Bennett stood before the towering iron gates of a Gothic mansion, her heart pounding in her chest. She tightened her grip on the strap of her worn backpack, her eyes reflecting a mix of hope and apprehension. Henry Lawson, the wealthy owner of the estate, had spent the past 2 years grieving the loss of his beloved wife. During that time, his only son, Ethan, just 7 years old, had withdrawn completely into silence, lost in a world of pain and solitude. Henry had tried everything, from child psychologists to speech therapists, but none had been able to help Ethan. In a final effort, he turned to a specialized support center, where they recommended Maria. Though Maria was mute, the center believed her ability to communicate through emotions and music could form a unique bond with Ethan. As the mansion's doors swung open, Mrs. Caldwell, Henry's longtime housekeeper, greeted Maria with a stern expression. "You're Maria Bennett?" she asked, her sharp gaze scanning her from head to toe. Maria nodded silently, offering a slight bow. "Remember," Mrs. Caldwell continued, "silence is the rule here. Do your job well and don't cause trouble." Maria stepped through the threshold, the chill of the vast but empty mansion washing over her. In her heart, she resolved that no matter how difficult the task, she would do everything in her power to help Ethan rediscover his voice and his smile. Maria stepped into the grand hall, where sunlight streamed through towering windows, casting shimmering patterns on the marble floor. The silence was so profound that Maria could hear her own footsteps echoing through the expansive corridors. Mrs. Caldwell, stern and commanding, led Maria through the mansion's long hallways. She pointed at various rooms, speaking briskly as if expecting no response. "The living room is here, the dining hall there, and that is Mr. Lawson's private wing. Stay out of it unless you're called." She stopped in front of a small door and opened it. "This is your room. Don't expect much. It's for the help." Maria looked into the modest space, furnished with a small bed, a rickety wardrobe, and a tiny window overlooking the inner courtyard. "Change into your uniform and be back in the kitchen in 5 minutes. Your first task awaits," Mrs. Caldwell instructed before leaving Maria alone. Maria changed into the plain gray uniform, feeling the unfamiliar fabric brush against her skin. She returned to the kitchen where Mrs. Caldwell was waiting. "You'll prepare breakfast for Master Ethan, toast with orange marmalade and fresh fruit. And remember, don't speak." "Oh, that's right, you can't." She smirked mockingly. Maria nodded, unaffected by the sarcasm. She began her work with quiet precision, focusing entirely on the task. When the tray was ready, she carefully carried it to Ethan's room, her heart wondering how the boy would react to a stranger's presence. Maria entered Ethan's room, where sunlight softly filtered through the blue curtains. The room was simple yet elegant, with a large bed and shelves lined with old books. In one corner, Ethan sat on the floor, his head bent over a sketchbook, the pages covered in messy scribbles. The sight of the boy, so absorbed in his solitude, made Maria's heart ache. She could sense the heavy silence that enveloped him like a shield. Maria quietly placed the tray of food on a small table nearby and stepped back, giving Ethan his space. The boy said nothing and didn't look up. Maria sat on a chair near the door, her hands tightly gripping her apron, careful not to startle him. But deep inside, she wondered if she could ever reach the boy hidden behind that wall of silence. Days passed, and Maria continued her silent routine. She brought meals to Ethan, cleaned his room, and maintained her distance, hoping he would slowly open up. One morning, Maria brought her old violin to the courtyard, where the sound could reach Ethan's room. She began playing a gentle melody, each note flowing like a soothing breeze. Ethan stepped out of his room, his wide eyes filled with surprise. He sat on the steps, listening intently. When the piece ended, Maria smiled at him, her expression filled with hope. Ethan didn't speak, but he moved closer, placing his hand on the violin as if to ask about it. From that moment, a bond began to form. The boy, once locked in silence, started to giggle as Maria played cheerful tunes. He even drew pictures of the violin and handed them to her. Maria realized that though he didn't say it, Ethan found comfort in her music and her quiet patience. Maria was playing a soft melody on her violin when a sharp voice shattered the tranquil atmosphere. "What do you think you're doing?" Mrs. Julia Blake, Ethan's speech therapist, marched into the courtyard, her heels clicking against the stone tiles. Her scrutinizing gaze swept over Maria from head to toe. "Don't you realize this boy needs real therapy? Music isn't going to make him talk," Mrs. Blake said, her tone dripping with disdain. Maria remained silent, clutching her violin, her eyes slightly lowered. Mrs. Blake turned to Henry, who had just stepped out into the corridor. "Mr. Lawson, I need to be honest. This girl's presence is only making Ethan retreat further into himself. If you truly want your son to recover, I recommend letting her go." Henry hesitated, his gaze shifting to Maria, who stood quietly, her expression calm but her eyes betraying a flicker of hurt. "But Ethan seems to be improving with her around," he said, his voice uncertain. "Improving?" Mrs. Blake scoffed. "That's superficial progress. Ethan needs to talk, not listen to music. I'm an expert in this field, and I assure you, keeping her here will only make things worse." Henry fell silent, clearly torn. Maria quietly left the courtyard, her emotions held tightly in check. She knew she couldn't argue against the words of a professional, but deep down, she also knew that Ethan had started opening up to her in a way no words could ever achieve. One morning, Maria was summoned to Henry's study. She stood before the large wooden door, a wave of apprehension washing over her. As she stepped inside, Henry's eyes were heavy with the weight of an agonizing decision. "Maria," he began, his voice low and measured, "I'm deeply grateful for everything you've done for Ethan, but I have to do what I believe is best for him. I've decided to let you go." Maria froze, the world around her seeming to crumble. Yet she merely bowed her head, her expression calm but her heart breaking. Henry continued, his tone somber. "This isn't what I want, but I can't ignore the advice of a professional. Please know this isn't your fault." The following day, Maria packed her belongings in silence. As she descended the grand staircase, Ethan appeared at the top of the stairs, tears streaming down his face. Suddenly, he shouted, "Don't go, Maria!" Maria stopped in her tracks, her eyes widening in shock. It was the first time Ethan had spoken since his mother's death. Henry, equally stunned, stared at his son in disbelief. Ethan ran toward Maria, wrapping his arms tightly around her. "Maria, don't go," he repeated, his voice trembling with emotion. Henry froze, unable to believe what he had just heard. His son, silent for so long, had finally spoken. Overwhelmed with regret and gratitude, Henry's eyes filled with tears as he stepped forward. Placing a trembling hand on Maria's shoulder, he said, his voice breaking, "I was wrong. I should have trusted you. Please, stay. Ethan needs you, and so do I." After the emotional incident, Henry quickly dismissed Mrs. Blake. He realized her advice wasn't driven by what was best for Ethan. but by her arrogance and prejudice toward Maria. Henry found Maria in the garden behind the mansion, playing a gentle melody on her violin. When she saw him, Maria stopped, her eyes filled with uncertainty. But Henry offered her a small, warm smile. "Maria," he said, his voice sincere, "I was wrong. I should never have doubted your worth. Ethan needs you, and so do I." Maria was momentarily surprised but didn't respond, simply bowing her head softly. From that day on, Maria stayed at the mansion. Each passing day strengthened the bond between her and Ethan. Through her music and patience, she continued to help the boy open up. As for Henry, he began spending more time with Maria and Ethan. Simple dinners in the kitchen, quiet walks in the garden, or stargazing on the terrace at night. All these moments wove a deep connection between them. It wasn't just admiration anymore, Henry realized. He had fallen in love with Maria. Her silence wasn't a barrier, but a testament to her sincerity and inner strength, qualities that had profoundly changed his family. After realizing Maria's importance to Ethan and to himself, Henry took the time to truly understand the quiet yet powerful woman who had entered their lives. Day by day, their relationship deepened through simple moments, caring for Ethan together, sharing dinners in the kitchen, and spending evenings under the stars as Maria played her gentle melodies on the violin. One spring afternoon, Henry led Maria to the rose garden behind the mansion. The air was quiet, filled only with birdsong and the soft fragrance of blooming flowers. He stopped under an arch of roses, his eyes filled with tenderness, but also resolve. "Maria," he began, his voice steady and sincere, "when you came here, I thought you would help Ethan heal from his pain, but I didn't realize that you wouldn't just help my son. You've changed my life entirely." Maria looked at Henry, her eyes wide with surprise, but also tinged with apprehension. "You've taught me that love doesn't need words, and that patience is the most powerful way to heal. Maria, I can't imagine a single day without you in my life, or Ethan's." Henry took a deep breath, his hands slightly trembling as he reached into his pocket. The weight of the moment pressed heavily on him, but when he looked into Maria's eyes, so full of quiet strength, his resolve solidified. He knelt down, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. When he opened it, a simple yet elegant ring sparkled inside. "Maria Bennett," he said softly, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Will you marry me?" Maria froze for a moment, her eyes brimming with tears. She nodded, a radiant smile breaking across her face. Though she couldn't speak, her expression said everything he needed to hear. Henry slid the ring onto her finger, and together they walked back toward the mansion, where Ethan stood waiting. The boy cheered excitedly when he realized their family would soon be complete. Spring sunlight filtered gently through the stained glass windows of the small chapel on the Lawson estate. The air was filled with the soft fragrance of wildflowers that decorated every corner, creating an atmosphere of quiet elegance. All eyes were on the couple of the day, Maria Bennett and Henry Lawson. Maria stepped into the chapel, her hands trembling slightly but her gaze steady and full of determination. She wore a simple yet graceful white dress adorned with delicate lace details. In her hands she held a bouquet of wildflowers picked that morning by Ethan, a meaningful gift from the boy she now considered her son. Ethan stood proudly next to Henry at the altar, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, his face glowing with pride and joy. As Maria approached, her eyes met Henry's, and an unspoken connection passed between them, a bond so deep it seemed to silence the world around them. The priest began the ceremony, his voice steady and warm, lending a sacred air to the moment. When the time came, the priest turned to Maria and asked the question everyone had been waiting for. "Do you, Maria Bennett, take Henry Lawson to be your husband, to love and cherish him for the rest of your life?" Maria looked into Henry's eyes, her own brimming with tears, her lips parted slightly, and then, to everyone's astonishment, a voice emerged, shaky yet clear. "I do." The chapel fell silent, the weight of the moment sinking in before it erupted into a chorus of applause and joyous tears. Ethan ran to Maria, wrapping his arms around her tightly. "Maria, you're amazing," he cried, his voice filled with emotion. Henry, the ever-composed businessman, found himself unable to hold back his tears. He took Maria's hands in his own, his gaze filled with awe and love. "A miracle," someone whispered in the crowd. But to those closest to Maria, they knew this was more than just a miraculous moment. It was a testament to the power of love and patience. As the ceremony concluded, Maria, Henry, and Ethan stepped into the sunlit garden. Laughter and congratulations filled the air, a testament to the joy shared by all who had witnessed the day. Maria had not only found her voice, but had also discovered the family she had longed for. That evening, Maria sat with her violin under the stars. Ethan rested his head on her shoulder while Henry sat across from them, his gaze never straying from the two people who now meant the world to him. A soft melody flowed from Maria's violin, saying everything that words could not, of love, family, and hope. After the wedding, life at the Lawson mansion was never the same. Every corridor and room was now filled with laughter and the vibrant sounds of a home truly alive. Maria, Henry, and Ethan didn't just become a family, they found deeper ways to connect with one another. Ethan, once lost in silence, now regularly expressed himself. He began learning the violin from Maria, and evenings at the mansion were often filled with simple yet meaningful melodies played by the two of them. Slowly, Ethan regained his confidence and even started attending lessons with other children in the village, something he never thought possible before. Henry, who had spent years immersed in work, realized that family was the most precious thing of all. He began spending more time with Ethan and Maria, from strolls in the rose garden to weekend trips outside the town. He also became a more attentive father, learning to understand Ethan through his expressions and gestures, a lesson he'd learned from Maria. Maria, now an integral part of the Lawson family, was not only a loving wife but also an inspiration. After the miraculous moment at their wedding, Maria began using her voice more, each word carrying profound meaning. She also started a small music class at the mansion, where local children could learn to express themselves through music. One sunny day in the garden, Ethan turned to Maria and said, "Mom, I want to perform my violin for everyone." Maria smiled, pride shining in her eyes as she looked at the boy who had once been trapped in silence but now had the courage to stand before others. Together with Henry, she arranged a small concert at the mansion, where Ethan played the very first piece Maria had ever played for him. The performance was not only a milestone for Ethan, but also a reminder of the power of love, patience, and music to heal. Under the starry sky that night, Henry held Maria's hand and whispered, "You didn't just bring a voice to Ethan. You brought light to my life. I can't imagine a life without you and him." Maria smiled, squeezing his hand gently. The sound of Ethan's violin drifted from the living room, and in that moment, they all knew they had found true peace. Clara Evans, a single mother, once had it all: a cozy home, a steady job, and a small, happy family. But everything fell apart when her husband, Matt Harper, tricked her into signing over all their assets. In a flash, Matt disappeared, taking everything with him and leaving Clara and their two young daughters, Mia and Ella, with nothing. Now, Clara works at a small diner to make ends meet. Each day feels like a battle as she struggles to put food on the table and keep her daughters warm. That evening, after finishing her shift, Clara sat outside the diner with Mia and Ella. The three of them shared the only sandwich she could afford, trying to keep the mood light despite the chilly night air. Just then, a sleek car pulled up nearby. A man stepped out and called her name. It was Andrew Carter, an old friend from high school. Andrew, once a shy and reserved classmate, now stood confidently in front of her, dressed in a sharp suit. He couldn't believe his eyes as he saw Clara in this state. "Clara, is that really you?" Andrew asked, his voice filled with shock and concern. Clara turned away, embarrassed but unable to hide her shame. "Hi, Andrew." "Yes, it's me." Andrew's gaze softened with empathy. He didn't need any further explanation to see that Clara and her daughters were in desperate need of help. But would Clara be willing to accept the support of her old friend? Andrew looked at Clara with deep concern in his eyes. He couldn't forget the girl he had admired back in high school. But now that image was replaced by one of exhaustion and weariness etched across her face. He knew he couldn't just walk away. "Clara, what happened? You can't stay out here like this," Andrew said, his voice full of care. Clara lowered her head, her voice trembling with a mix of shame and despair. "Everything It all just fell apart, Andrew. I don't want to drag you into my mess. You've done so well for yourself. I can't be a burden. Andrew immediately interrupted. You're not a burden. Please, let me help. Clara shook her head, overwhelmed by a mix of shame and fear. She was used to relying on no one but herself, but Andrew was persistent. He offered to take Clara and her daughters to his home, at least for the night, so they could have a safe place to stay. My house has plenty of space. You and the girls can stay there until things settle down, he said earnestly. Clara hesitated, her mind racing with conflicting thoughts. Accepting Andrew's help felt like admitting defeat, something she had always fought against. But as she glanced at Mia and Ella, their tiny bodies trembling under threadbare jackets, the protective mother in her outweighed her pride. All right, but just temporarily, Clara replied, her voice soft but laced with determination. Andrew gave her a reassuring smile. Don't worry, you don't have to do this alone anymore. As Andrew helped the three of them gather their few belongings and load them into his car, Clara felt a glimmer of hope, something she hadn't felt in a very long time. At Andrew's spacious and welcoming home, Clara and her daughters began to experience a sense of stability they hadn't felt in months. Andrew prepared a comfortable room for them, complete with warm blankets, clean clothes, and hearty meals. For the first time since losing their home, Mia and Ella slept in real beds. In the early days, Clara felt out of place and awkward. She wasn't used to accepting help, especially from an old friend like Andrew. But Andrew offered more than just a roof over their heads. He patiently listened and encouraged Clara to open up about her struggles. One evening, as the girls played in the living room, Andrew sat down next to Clara. Clara, I know you've been through a lot, but have you ever thought about what you really want to do? Clara gave a wistful smile. What I want? I don't even know where to start anymore. Andrew smiled back, his eyes full of encouragement. I remember back in high school you had a real passion for interior design. I can still recall the projects you did in art class. Have you ever thought about picking that up again? Clara hesitated. The thought of going back to learning felt daunting. I don't think I have what it takes anymore, Andrew. It's been too long. But Andrew didn't give up. He helped Clara research online courses in interior design and even covered the tuition fees for her. Initially, Clara was nervous and unsure of herself, but with Andrew's persistent encouragement, she started taking small steps. During her classes, Clara quickly realized that her creativity was still very much alive. Her assignments impressed her instructors and classmates alike, and she gradually regained her confidence. Over time, Clara not only relearned valuable skills but also rediscovered a passion she thought she had lost. Andrew was always there to support her, whether it was watching the kids or helping her brainstorm ideas. Clara began to see herself not just as a struggling single mother, but as a capable woman building a better future for herself and her children. As Clara was gradually rebuilding her life, a part of her past she had tried to forget resurfaced. Her ex-husband, Matt Harper. Clara knew she had to confront him, not for her own sake, but for Mia and Ella. Clara reached out to Matt, hoping he would take responsibility as a father and at least provide financial support for their daughters. But when they met, her hope quickly turned into disappointment. Matt, now living a luxurious life, showed no remorse or concern. I have nothing to do with your life anymore, Clara. Whatever happened is your fault. Take care of it yourself, he said coldly. Clara felt a pang in her heart. She had thought that, at the very least, Matt might change for the sake of his children, but he remained as selfish as ever. When Clara returned home, she was disheartened but not defeated. Andrew was there, as always, ready to listen and support her. Clara, you don't need Matt's approval or support to succeed. Look at all the amazing things you've accomplished in such a short time. You're not just an incredible mother, you're a strong, capable woman, Andrew said, his voice filled with sincerity. Andrew's words made Clara realize that she didn't need to cling to the past anymore. Matt no longer held any power over her life. Instead, she resolved to focus all her energy on creating a brighter future for Mia and Ella. That day, Clara learned an invaluable lesson. Sometimes, to move forward, you have to let go of what no longer matters. One quiet evening, as Clara was tidying up the kitchen after dinner, Mia and Ella walked in, their eyes sparkling with something they wanted to share. Clara wiped her hands, sat down at the table, and motioned for her daughters to join her. Mom, we want to tell you something, Mia said, her voice soft but serious. Clara smiled warmly, watching Mia and Ella sit down beside her. "What is it, girls? I'm listening." Ella hesitated for a moment before speaking. "We don't think we need someone like Matt to be our dad anymore. He never cared about us." Clara sighed quietly. Those words, though heartbreaking, were a truth she knew they couldn't ignore. Mia added firmly, "But Mom, Uncle Andrew is so kind to us. He listens when we talk, plays games with us, and helps us when we're stuck. He makes us feel safe, like he really cares about us. I don't know if he's like a dad, but maybe he could be one someday." Ella nodded, her eyes glistening. "Uncle Andrew does all the things I think a dad would do. He always asks if we're okay, tells funny stories, and hugs us so warmly. With him around, I don't feel like we need Matt anymore." Clara sat silently for a moment, tears welling up in her eyes. She realized that although Andrew never tried to replace Matt, his genuine care and affection had filled the void in Mia and Ella's hearts. Taking their hands, Clara whispered, "I'm so happy you feel Uncle Andrew's love. He truly cares about you, and that means more to me than anything." Ella smiled softly, her eyes bright. "Uncle Andrew is special, Mom. I think if we could choose a dad, we'd choose him." Clara pulled her daughters into a tight embrace, her heart overflowing with gratitude and hope. As time passed, Clara and Andrew grew closer. Andrew was no longer just the person who had helped her during tough times. He had become an integral part of her and her daughters' lives. Andrew spent countless hours with Mia and Ella, from helping Mia with her homework to reading bedtime stories to Ella. The two girls, who had never experienced the love of a real father, quickly bonded with Andrew and began to see him as a father figure. Clara watched all of this with a heart full of emotions. She knew Andrew wasn't doing these things out of obligation or pity. The love and patience he showed her daughters were genuine and heartfelt. Still, Clara couldn't help but feel apprehensive. The scars from her past made her hesitant to open up completely. She wondered if she deserved this newfound happiness and whether she could trust another man with her heart. One evening, as Clara and her daughters played in the yard, Andrew approached her. "Clara, I don't just want to help you and the girls get back on your feet. I want to be a part of your lives forever," he said, his voice full of sincerity. Clara felt a lump rise in her throat. "Andrew, I don't know if I can move past this fear. I'm scared that if I let this get too close, it'll all slip away again." Andrew gently took Clara's hand. "I understand that you're afraid. But Clara, sometimes, to move forward, you have to take a leap of faith. And I promise, I won't let you or the girls get hurt again." Andrew's words brought Clara a sense of peace. Slowly but surely, she learned to trust and accept the love that Andrew brought into her life. Not just for her, but for Mia and Ella too. A few months later, Clara felt her life transforming in ways she had never dared to dream. With Andrew's unwavering support, she had completed her interior design course and started taking on small projects from friends and acquaintances. Clara not only felt proud of the work she was doing, but also saw that she had finally created a path for lasting stability for Mia and Ella. One evening, Andrew hosted a small party at his home to celebrate Clara's first major accomplishment, completing a design project for a local coffee shop. Close friends and a few new clients came to congratulate her. Clara felt surrounded by love and support, something she had missed for so long. After the party, Andrew surprised Clara by kneeling in front of her with a sparkling ring in his hand. "Clara, you and the girls have changed my life. You're not just the person I admired in high school. You're the person I want to spend the rest of my life with. Will you marry me?" Clara looked at Andrew with tears in her eyes. She thought about everything she had endured, from being homeless and heartbroken to this moment where a hopeful future was within reach. "Yes, Andrew, I will," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. Their wedding was simple yet filled with warmth, attended by close friends and family. Mia and Ella were overjoyed to wear beautiful bridesmaid dresses, and Andrew officially adopted both girls, becoming the father they had always dreamed of. Together, Clara, Andrew, Mia, and Ella began a new chapter of their lives. Love, patience, and trust had carried them through the hardest times and helped them build a family full of joy and happiness. After the wedding, the bond between Andrew and Clara's daughters, Mia and Ella, blossomed into something truly special. From morning routines filled with laughter to bedtime stories that sparked their imaginations, Andrew became more than just a caring presence. He became the hero they had always longed for. At first, the girls were a little shy, but Andrew's patience and unconditional love quickly made them feel safe and cherished. Before long, Mia and Ella started calling Andrew Dada, a word they had never used before. The first time Mia hesitantly called him that, Andrew was so moved he could barely speak. He knelt down, hugged the two girls tightly, and promised them that he would always be there for them, ensuring they would never feel alone or unloved again. From that moment on, Mia and Ella saw Andrew as someone they could fully trust. Whenever they had something exciting or troubling to share, they would go to Andrew first. Mia loved showing him her schoolwork and telling him about the good grades she earned, while Ella often whispered little secrets to him that she wasn't ready to tell anyone else. One evening, Mia walked into the living room holding a drawing she had made of their family. In the picture, Mia, Ella, Clara, and Andrew were standing hand in hand under a bright, shining sun. "I drew you too, Dad," Mia said, pointing at Andrew's figure in the drawing. "You're the one who makes us happy." Andrew couldn't hold back his tears. Mia's words were the clearest testament to the love and trust he had built with the family. Their small family now lived in a warm, cozy home that Andrew had personally redesigned, with input from Clara. Every corner of the house reflected their love and unity. From Mia and Ella's hand-drawn artwork on the walls to the garden where they often spent time planting flowers and vegetables together. Clara continued to grow her interior design career. Her creativity and determination made her a sought-after designer in the area. Andrew, despite running his successful business, always made time to support his wife, whether it was encouraging her professionally or taking care of the girls at home. Mia and Ella now had not just a safe place to call home, but also a father they adored. The two grew closer to Andrew each day, seeing him as their hero. Laughter and joy filled their home, a testament to the love and happiness the family had built together. Clara and Andrew's journey is a powerful reminder of how resilience, love, and kindness can transform lives. Clara's story begins in despair, but blossoms into a testament to the human spirit's ability to rebuild and thrive. She went from being a single mother left with nothing to becoming a confident woman with a flourishing career, all while rediscovering the power of trust and connection. It was through Andrew's unwavering patience and genuine compassion that Clara and her daughters found not only stability, but a sense of belonging they had been missing for so long. There's something profoundly moving about moments like when Mia and Ella first called Andrew Dad. It wasn't just a word, it was a declaration, a heartfelt acknowledgement of the love and security he had given them. In that moment, Andrew wasn't just stepping into a role, he was proving that family isn't about shared blood, but about shared love, care, and commitment. Those moments remind us of the incredible potential of second chances, not just for one person, but for everyone they touch. Clara's journey is also a reflection of how, even in the darkest times, kindness can light the way forward. Andrew didn't just offer her a place to stay, he offered her the belief that she was capable of so much more. And Clara didn't just accept his help, she found the courage to fight for her future, to rediscover the passions she had long buried, and to show her daughters what it means to rise above adversity. Together they built something far more meaningful than a stable home. They built a family filled with love, laughter, and mutual respect. This story teaches us that no matter how overwhelming life's challenges may seem, it's never too late to start again. Acts of kindness, no matter how small, can ripple outwards and transform lives in unimaginable ways. Clara and Andrew's story also reminds us that love isn't just something we feel, it's something we do. It's in the sacrifices we make, the patience we show, and the support we offer without expecting anything in return. Now, as you reflect on Clara's story, ask yourself, what part of their journey inspired you the most? Have you ever witnessed or experienced a second chance that changed someone's life? Stories like this are meant to remind us of what's possible, but they also inspire us to take action. If Clara's story touched your heart, consider sharing it with someone who might need a little hope today. You never know how much of a difference your kindness can make in someone's life. Together, we can create a ripple effect, spreading messages of hope, love, and the incredible power of second chances to the people who need them most.